There's something about a fire. I love a fire. I think it sort of goes right back to our early ancestry. My dad always says, until we got the fire going, the house isn't alive. And he's right, it brings the house to life. Back in the Yateley days, we always used to have a candle going, several candles going. Sometimes there'd be like up to 3 of us perched, all perched on the same bed chair, all zoned out, staring at the candle. And that's always the way. If you've got a fire going or a candle going and you've got a group of lads around it, you watch, everyone will be, yeah man, looking at the candle, always like that. There was one bloke at Yateley, in fact, old Derek Rance. Some of you might remember him, he's passed away now, bless him. But Derek was deaf, so it was all the more important for Derek to have candles. He'd have half a dozen going, there'd be one on a bucket, one in a jam jar, one on a bank stick, they'd be all over his bivvy, because it was important for him to be able to see not just your lips, but your hand movements, you know. Obviously he couldn't hear nothing. And quite often on the old North Lake, Derek was the only other one there. So, you know, you needed to have a chat, as it were, with someone. So I'd always go around and see Derek, and his bivvy would always be loaded with candles. I could tell you a quick funny story about Derek, actually. We used to, you weren't allowed boats or to swim or dinghies or lilos or any of that malarkey back in the Yateley days, but obviously we used to try our hardest to get away with it. And I can remember one day we were all sat in a group having a barbecue, and suddenly we've heard a run, and it's absolutely belting off, and it was going forever. And we've all gone legging it. It was coming from Derek's swim, so we've all gone legging it down to Derek's swim. And where was he? He's 40 yards out in the lake with his rig in a bucket, and he'd put the rod on the rest and left the buzzer on. He can't hear it, can he? So you can imagine when he's out in the lake, flapping around, he's turning around and all of Yateley, all of the complex, is in his swim, laughing their heads off, he burst into laughter himself. Yeah, like I say, he's gone now, old Derek, but he certainly caught them. He certainly achieved his dreams. In fact, thinking about it, it was old Derek who inspired the first vibrating functions on bite alarms. We never used to have that on bite alarms before. And because of course he couldn't hear his buzzers, he'd always have it on anyway. I'm sure in the early days it was just so someone else could come and wake him up when he had a bite. But yeah, once we had the vibrating buzzers, or the boxes rather, he'd sleep with one of them underneath his pillow. So yeah, it made a big difference to someone like old Derek. Just recently I had a bit of a sort out. I found loads of old knickknacks, I tell you, going back years and years and years. But one of the things I found, I know, just looks like a couple of spring clips cable tied together. But oh no, that there is a Jeff Pink candle holder. And during my time on the North, that would have held countless candles. You used to just clip it on a bank stick, like so. I know, really high tech, this thing. And that'd be like so, in the old bank, in the ground. And on a longer bank stick, obviously you could have it up higher or lower or whatever. Simple, I know, but it done the job. What else did I find? Now that there was my old Yateley kettle. Not just the North Lake, but all of the lakes at Yateley I had that kettle for. It had 1 or 2 repairs, or rather I got Dad to help me repair it, repaired the handle on it 2 or 3 times, but in the end I gave up and I got Dad to fill it with concrete. So now it serves as my doorstop. If you had a brew with me back in the Yateley days, then it almost certainly would have been from that kettle. What else did I find? Some of you will know what this is. Scruffy, torn, stretched, bobbled and ragged. But that's my old Bazil cardie. That's what I was wearing when I caught Bazil, and I wouldn't part with that for the world. I was a lot of luck, that old cardie. If you haven't guessed already, we're on a bit of a Yateley theme, and I'm going to give you the old Bazil story. Now, it's some time ago now, going back 20 plus years, so you might have to bear with me. Where to start? Bazil. Well, first of all, it's probably best that I set the atmosphere. You know, there was far fewer 40 pounders about back then. They were really, really rare. There was probably only half a dozen in the country. And you must remember as well that when you're younger, the country's a lot smaller place as well. But there was very, very few. Bazil was a really, really famous carp, probably the most famous 40 pounder to ever live. I'm not sure that the word prestigious gives it enough credit, really. You know, for me at that age, it was so prestigious, it was like out of reach. You know, you never even imagined that you'd ever be able to fish for it, let alone catch it. But it wasn't going to stop me from trying, I'll tell you that much. The lake's probably about 10 acres, It's made up of islands, bays, points, weed beds, gravel bars, more features than you can imagine, with a very, very low stock of carp as well. I think, if I remember right, they reckon that there was 10 in there, but 1 or 2 of those never ever turned up during my time on the lake, and I don't ever remember them getting caught after I'd finished either. I think there was probably only 8 or 9 carp in the lake. I'll try and go through them. Obviously you had Bazil, Lord of the Lake, mid-40s. You had another one called the Snake that was sort of low to mid-30s, that was second in command. You had Baby Bazil, that was a mid-20, probably about 25, 26. You had one called the Pretty One, 23-ish. You had the Big Common. Every lake's got a Big Common, except back then they didn't tend to be quite as big as they are now, but yeah, it was sort of 22 to 24. There was a mid-double common, 14, 15 pounder, and there were meant to be 3 little tails, nothing to do with me. But yeah, one of the lads had dropped 3 in there out of his fish tank several years before. He put them in there at a very, very small size. I think there was only 2 of those left, but they were the same sort of size, mid-doubles, 14, 15 pound. So a real low stock of carp, 8, 9 carp. It'd probably take too long for me to go through all of my fishing up on the North Lake. We had a close season back then. The season didn't even start until June the 16th, and if I remember rightly, I didn't start fishing in the North until sort of mid-July. First month or so of the season, I fished up on the Cops Lake. But yeah, like I say, it'd take too long to go through it all, but I managed 3 or 4 through the summer. Really, it was just a learning process, you know, learning the lake, finding out the carp's habits. I had 2 or 3 close encounters with Bazil, so I've been lucky enough to see it in the water. But really, whenever I think of the North Lake, I think of winter, because that's when I've done most of my time up there. And not just winter, but I always remember the work swim, the main work swim, open. Nowadays it's all full of foliage, got all trees all along it, it's lovely and mature. But back then it was very, very open, uncomfortable swim. I can remember it was in January, not long after Christmas, we'd had a freeze up for a couple of weeks. It'd been really, really cold. And then a big mild front came in. And it was uncomfortable fishing, but mega fishing conditions, like, you know, big southwesterly crashing into the main work swim. And I remember I was sat up on my bed chair. I always used to sit cross-legged then. Don't know if I'm quite as flexible. Yeah, just about. But I'd be sat up on the old bed chair, Coleman stove, no doubt, right there, warming my hands up. Had the old door almost down, just a little bit up. And it's all flapping in the wind. But I was ill-equipped back then, you know, not like today. If I'm fishing long sessions through the winter now, I'm well comfortable. But back then, I didn't even have a ground sheet, and I remember I had a really thin sleeping bag as well. Didn't even have a woolly hat, you know, it was really, really ill-equipped. But I can remember sitting there, and it's windy. I can hear the old waves sloshing into the front of the swim up against the boards. Slosh. Pitter-patter of rain on top of the bivvy. Winds howling, you got to picture it, like, you know. And I had the radio on, no doubt would have been listening to Radioactive back then, one of the local pirate stations. Nowadays it's all about Cool London, but back then it was Radioactive. I remember the old radio's on, and I had to turn it up a little bit to drown out all the sounds around me. But I suddenly became aware of a humming noise. And as I reached across and turned down the old radio, the humming got louder, and one of the rods was melting off. I remember I burst through the bivvy door. Remember, takes on the North Lakes were really few and far between. You know, like, so to get a take at any time of the year meant the world. But in January, whoa, like my heart was going 10 to the dozen, like, you know. But I got down to the rod, the clutch is melting. I was only fishing close in. Normally in the work swim, you'd fish further out. But this wind was really, really mild. And you had a bar close in. It's probably only underarm flick out from the bank. But I was fishing just over the back of it. It's only shallow, probably 4 foot on top of the bar, about 5, 6 foot behind it. And I had both baits close in, and this fish had taken, and it was, by the time I picked up the rod, it was probably 30, 40 yards out in the lake, especially once it's taken a bit more line off of me. I remember it went out into the lake, and the wind's crashing in, it's over my boots, the waves and all that, like I'm all bedraggled, the rain's stinging my face. You've got to picture it, like, you know, January time. And this fish has gone out on a long line, and then it kited left on a long line. I can't gain anything, but it's not taking anything more from me. And just to my left, you had the entrance to the bay. In the end of that bay was Bazil's bush, the old famous bush swim. But this fish has kited round, and there was a snag probably, I don't know, 15 to 20 yards out the margin. And this fish was kite around. I managed to stop it just short of the snag, and the waves are coming in, you've got to imagine. And I still can remember, I don't remember a great deal, but I do remember that big orange tail flopping out on the surface as I turned it away from the snag. And I got it coming. I never let it go back over the back of that bar. The bars in the old North Lake were quite sharp, so I kept it this side of the bar. Waves are coming in and all that, and it surfaced, got it in. Not Bazil, but it was the old second in command, the snake. And at the time it was a new PB, 31 pounds an ounces. I remember, I think it was 31 pound 4 ounces. Big carp for me. It's still a big carp to me now, but at the time it was my biggest ever carp. I'd caught a couple of 30s from the cops, I think, so but even so, like I say, a 30 pounder was a big fish. So I felt close, you can imagine. I've just caught the snake. Bazil had history of getting caught with the snake over the years. You know, they'd done like a joint capture several times over the years. So I was convinced. I thought the very next bite, it's got to be Bazil, the next one. I think it was at that, up until then, although I'd been fishing there for months and I'd caught some of the other residents, Bazil still felt like a dream. You know, I could never imagine actually catching it. But having just caught the second biggest, all of a sudden what seemed out of reach seemed possible, you know, and it was so exciting. What happened then, I remember the weather went still for a couple of days, calm, the wind stopped, and I had to wait 2 or 3 days before those mega southwesterlies returned, and they came in exactly the same as before. I remember it was exactly the same as before, because my bobbins, we never used to use chains then, we used to just have like a string, a nylon cord. And I can remember with the force of the wind, it was so windy that the bobbins actually blew all the way back up the line, the full length of the cords. That's how windy it was blowing in. And they'd done exactly that 2 or 3 days before and when I'd caught the 30. So it was exactly the same conditions. And similar to before, the old doors down, just a little bit up, you know, I've got the old radio on. This time I'm waiting for the humming to start on the radio, like, oh, God. And I've worked myself up. You've got to imagine what's happened over the course of that 2 or 3 days since I'd caught the 30. You know, I've been chatting to all the lads around the lake and that. I'd really worked myself up. I was catching Bazil. It was going to happen. Everyone thought it was going to happen, the very next bite. So when that buzzer melted off again, man, I'm telling you, like, this time around, it's got to be Bazil. It's Bazil. I know it's Bazil. I was shaking, picked up the rod. It's done exactly the same as the 30. Went out on a long line, probably 40 odd yards from the bank, and then kited left. But this time round, it managed to make it past that snag. And probably because in my heart, I was sure it was going to be Bazil, I was a little bit more careful. I was a bit girly, you know what I mean? You know, it's like, you know, I'm not going to lose this. No way is this one falling off. But it made it past the snag and actually ended up weeding itself at the entrance to the bay. And my line was running just clipping the edge of the outermost branches of the snag, and the fish is weeded. So it's stalemate, like, you know, I'm stuck. I put the rod on the rest and I'm wondering what to do. I kept picking it up, thinking, oh, I don't want to pull it out of the weed because all I'm going to do is pull it directly into the snag. Now, this seems crazy, and it was crazy for January time, but I stripped off to my boxer shorts. I've got to be honest, I didn't imagine that I'd have to take the full plunge. I didn't think I'd have to swim the rod round the tree. I'd walked up to the base of the tree. If you imagine, it was all dead limbs going out into the lake, and the thickest trunks were probably 3-4 foot underneath the surface. And I imagined that I'd be able to strip off to my boxer shorts, walk out along it, past the line, round the outermost branches, and then I'd be all right again. There was a little swim just the other side of the snag at the entrance to the bay. So I ran my net down into that first, so the net was in position. All I had to do was get my line around that snag, get into that little swim, little gap more than anything. My net would be there waiting, and then Bazil was going to be mine. It was going to all be over, all that time, all that effort. I was going to get Bazil. The thing is, this snag, like once I stood on it, it started bending and rocking like it does. And you know, when it's covered in algae, you know, it's got all that green algae all over it, slimy and that. So before I knew it, I'm treading water. I've slipped off the branches, I'm treading water. But, you know, all I've got to do now is get, so it all happened so fast. But I paddled my way around this snag. It all happened in the space of about a minute. But I paddled my way around this snag, climbed up the slippery, muddy slope. You've got to imagine it, the wind and the rain, and I'm in boxer shorts and I've got mud all over my feet. It was awful. I don't even remember pulling that fish out of the weed. I just remember getting it in as quick as I possibly could, and it wasn't Bazil. It was one I'd caught before, the pretty one at 23 pounds. But so close, so close. I tell you why I know how close I was. That day, after that, I remember I just poked the pole into the shrubbery when I netted that fish and left him in the edge. Ran back to my bivvy and I had the door down full, the Coleman on, and I'm sort of hunched in the roof of the bivvy, shaking up, shaking to bits. Like, you know, I remember I scorched my hair and everything, like trying to dry myself out over the stove. And once I was dry enough, I actually shot home. I shot home for a bath, a freshen up, and to sort myself out. And that night I got back quite late. I left my kit. You used to be able to get away with leaving your kit in the swim then. Everything was safe. But I got back late that night, and conditions were still similar. The wind's blowing in, it's still mild and what have you. And I can remember sat inside my bivvy and I heard what at first sounded like a goose or geese fighting, you know, when they're crashing around on the surface. But I ran out from the bivvy, it wasn't a goose, it was Bazil, and it came out 3 or 4 times while I was stood there. And although it was the middle of the night, you know, because there was a wind on the surface, you could see it. You know, if it's calm, and you've got a black surface then, but as soon as you've got a ripple across the surface, it shows more grey, more silver. And I could see the bulk of it. It came out in the wind, just to the left, not right over the top of where I was fishing, just to the left. I know that was Bazil, you know, and I was sat there and I was sure I was going to catch it, but as is often the way, the chance melted away, it drifted away, it all went quiet, and that was the end of that. So that was January. I think my next chance for fish out of the North Lake, I caught the big common in February, single hook bait, cast up tight to the back of the corral island from the next swim down from the main works, the end work swim. Not a monster, 22 pound, but it meant the world. It was another step closer. Trying to think, there was a bit of more of a lull after that. I caught one of the little tails. Like I say, there was meant to be 3 of those in there, but I believe there was only 2. And I only ever caught one of them, and I caught the same one 3 times. But like the third capture of that fish, that was the early March, and I caught it out of a swim known as the 30-40 swim, right down in the islands, completely different part of the lake. Again, that was the start of March, bit of a lull. The next fish I remember getting caught came to Alan Taylor, and while we're talking about the little tails, it was the other one on the little tails. Up until then, I didn't even know that there was going to be 2 of them, let alone 3, but there was definitely 2 because Al caught one of them, 13, 14 pound. That would have been towards the end of March. And I can remember that day that Alan caught that fish, I was set up in the end work swim, and I left my kit, went home for a bath again, stock up on bait and whatever, fresh grub, and I got back late that night. Alan was sat in he had a little dome tent. A lot of carp anglers, especially at Yateley, used to use dome tents back then and sleep on a lilo, like in a little dome tent, little entrance to it. And I can remember sitting in the entrance to Alan's dome tent, drinking tea, chatting like you do in the middle of the night. And the lake was calm that night. And in the distance, long way away, I heard one jump, and it was a big fish. It was clear from the sound of it. It's come out. Al stuck his head out the dome and we're looking, and then it jumped out 2 or 3 times more. It was definitely Bazil. Exactly the same as what I'd heard in the main work swim back in January. Now, this time round I saw where it was, and I watched as the rings spread on the calm surface, moonlit night, and I watched the old rings spreading, and it was probably 90 odd yards away, right over in a swim known as the Corral, the famous Corral, scene of many captures of Bazil over the past, yet funny enough a swim that I'd rarely fished. I'd only ever fished it once or twice in the past. Now I was already plotted up, it was the middle of the night, I was fishing in the end works. We never had barras back then. And I'm not just talking carp porters, you know, like the barras that we use now. I don't even remember having a wheelbarrow. We used to, if we wanted to move swims, it'd be several trips. You know, you'd run a bit round at a time. So I left it till morning before moved my kit round to the corral, got everything set up, had a little bit of a plumber bait out there, found a bit that was nice. There was, years down the line, they actually drained the North Lake, so everything that you imagined actually went out the window. But at the time, you know, there was more bars and plateaus than we ever realised. But at the time, I remember there was a bar at about 80 yards out, and it was probably about 5 or 6 foot on top of it, and down the back of it, it was silty and sort of 6, 7 foot, a little bit deeper. And I fished 2 rods over the back of that, and I spread about 80 baits around it. Traps were set, 2 rods, not 3. Trying to think, Nige visited me that night. At Yateley, it was a constant stream of visitors. Like, you know, it was just one big social, you know, like one big happy family at Yateley. I think Jamie popped in that night, Bernie Loftus, everyone did it. It was just like the go-to place for everyone if they were bored. Now, it came in misty that night, real thick, heavy mist. And first thing in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, this is March time, end of March. In fact, it was the first year of the close season when we could actually fish through the close season. Prior to that, you wasn't allowed to fish in the close season. And this was the first year where the close season was abolished on still waters. So normally the season would have finished March the 14th. This was like towards the end of March, March 29th, March 30th. And it's misty. I remember waking up in the morning to a couple of bleeps, and I had a bream. So on my left rod. As funny as it sounds, out of 10 captures that I caught during my time on the North Lake, every single one of them were caught on the right-hand rod. Bizarre, no reason for it, all from different swims from all over the lake. But I had this bream on the left rod, and I just flicked the rod back out. They couldn't even see where it landed, it was that misty. And I'd only just set the rod back on the rest when I had a single bleep on the right rod. And it was that misty, you could only just about make out where the line met the water. But I'm looking at the tip, and I can see that the tip's just gradually nodding. And I'm watching the line, and I see the line gradually starting to move right. But it took a while before I picked up the rod. I didn't want to strike at a line bite, but eventually I realised there's obviously something on the end. I picked up the rod, laid into it, and I'm into one, heavy. Within a few seconds, it actually surfaced off of the corner of the island. There's an island, you've got an island to the left of the corral, the main corral island, probably one of the biggest islands on the lake. And there was more of a little cigar-shaped a strip island to the right. And this fish surfaced off the right of it, big boil. And then it come towards me. I remember going in line quite fast. And it wasn't until it got right underneath the tip, all the way in like that, all the way like that, and then it exploded on the surface and then shot off at the margin. Now, when it exploded on the surface, I was convinced it was baby Bazil. I'd seen a bit of scaling on it, definitely a mirror, definitely got a bit of half linear scales. I thought, that's baby Bazil, you know, and it felt like a 20-pounder, you know, it had that lively feel to it. But it went shooting off at the margin. I had to put the old tip down. You had a bit of snaggery up to the right. So I turned it away from them, pulled him back up again. I remember when it surfaced, even then, I didn't realise what I was playing. You know, it just felt too lively to be Bazil. But I got it into the net, and it powered into the corner of the mess, into the corner. I waited for it to calm down, looked into the net, and I thought, that's a whacker. And I rolled it. It wasn't until I rolled him on his side, and then I realised just what I had. Not just its width, but the depth of it. You know, and you've got to think my biggest carp prior to catching Bazil was the snake. So there's quite a big gap. 13, 14 pound bigger than anything I'd caught before. And that 13 to 14 pound, you know, while I'm looking at it in the landing net, I'm 99.9% sure what I've got. You know, I know it's Bazil, I'm looking at it, it's Bazil. But yeah, that last little niggly bit of doubt came when I lifted it. You know, and I took the old landing net pole off, rolled it up and lifted it. Yeah, that's definitely Bazil. I had no hooking mat there. Back then it would have been the old CP mats, the old original one hooking mats. I dragged my sleeping bag off, who cares? It's having all the protection in the world. It's the most prestigious carp. You got to think, for a carp that's so rare, so sought after, so prestigious, you felt like, you know, there was a lot of responsibility. Like, you know, you were in charge of that fish, the most famous carp in the country. You know, everyone knows Bazil, and I'm the only one there, the only one on the lake. You know, it was my moment, all on my own, and I've got Bazil lying on my sleeping bag. The shock of it is hard to, you know, it's always those first ones. Whenever you do something for the first time, that's the most exciting, that's the most shocking time that you will ever do something. You know, especially when you've got a big jump. I had a similar thing with Mary. You know, often I'm asked the question, I've been asked several times over the years, you know, what's your most memorable carp? And it's always a hard choice between Bazil or Mary. Bazil, obviously, because it was my first 40. Mary, because of what it was, you know, a new record. But it's more than that, you know, with both of those fish there was a big jump. You know, Bazil, 13, 14 pound bigger than anything I'd ever caught before. Mary, again, my biggest carp prior to catching Mary was Bazil. So again, you're looking at a 10 pound jump. That's a lot, that has an impact, you know, when you look at a fish of that size on the mat. So there I am, I've got Bazil there, I've unhooked him, you can imagine, oh God, shaking, all the rest of it. I put him into a sack. I didn't weigh him first. I put him into a sack and I sacked him up off the front of the corral. You had a load of roots all at the front of the corral. So I tied the sack cord to the roots. You know, it's like you tie so many knots that in the end you've got no cord left, you know what I mean? Long line of knots, like, you know. Check, yep, that root's attached to that big tree there, is not going anywhere, it was all safe. I had a cup of tea first, took it all in. It was still early in the morning. By now it's probably only sort of 6:45 in the morning. And then I went down and woke up the lads. Hardly anyone had a mobile phone back then. But the first person I woke up was Rob Mailing. I can't remember now whether he was on the, I think he was on the car park lake, but I woke up Rob. No, he would have been on the pad lake. He would have been in pole position. I woke up Rob. And then Rob made the phone call, and yeah, before I knew it, everyone, all the lads from Yateley were there in my swim, in the old corral. I had Jeff Pink there, my old mate Lewis, Nigel obviously, Jamie, yeah, Pinky, everyone, all the lads, all the Yateley crew. And yeah, it's hard to put into words, you know, the whole thing was very, very surreal. You know, to a fish of that size, a fish that meant so much to me. I'd done about 150 nights for Bazil. A lot of it on my own, you know, through the winter months. And there it was in my arms, you know, like real special fish. 45 pounds, 6 ounces. Bazil never really fluctuated much in weight. I think throughout my whole time on there, it was always sort of 43 to 46 pound. I think there was one chap, Bucks Fizz, he fished for Bazil for 14 years and he caught it at its biggest ever weight, which was 49 pounds, which I thought was quite fitting after all the effort that he put in. But yeah, that was Bazil. Bazil, prize of the North Lake, the king, the first 40 pounder I'd ever caught, and the start of something. If anything ever set off an obsession for fishing for big fish, it was Bazil.